Hello, and welcome to Chapter 1 of your Art Appreciation course. Chapter 1 is called Living with Art, and it's an introduction into what we will be talking about this semester. Oftentimes, when we discuss art, we are discussing the meaning of it, and some artists choose to explore kind of the simplest words that can have the deepest meanings. Brancusi spent his life trying to give shape to these very simple words. And what we're looking at here is actually a studio image. So this is where he would have worked and created his pieces. And in it, we can see several different pieces that explore this idea of the simple words. So right here, for example, this piece is called Fish. And you can see that it doesn't really resemble a representational idea of a fish. But what it does is it kind of creates this feeling of what a fish might feel like when it's swimming, like when it's cutting through the water and slicing through that wetness. In the background, we can see Bird in Space. In this work, he is exploring the idea of how a bird flies and again cutting through space, but in this case, it's a vertical feeling and kind of pushing and releasing that bird into space. We also have Endless Column, which is right here. And this work, he's exploring that idea of kind of going up into infinity, kind of repeating this shape over and over again as it leads your eye up. And so it's this idea that it could go on forever. So when we see works in an atmosphere like this, it's somewhat different from when we see works in real life. Sometimes they can be in an environment that wouldn't necessarily be as pristine as a gallery or a studio setting. This is an example of a photograph that Brancusi took of his bird in space, and you can see how it changes the sculpture. So we're seeing it surrounded by what looks like detritus of another work maybe, and then you can see the light and shadow and how it plays on the form, and then that shadow in the background that's created right here really adds to the piece and almost duplicates it in a sense. So when we see works in the world around us, it's going to change how we think about them. And living with art can really affect us as viewers, and it can affect the art as well. When we're talking about the world of art, we often talk about the aesthetic experience, which is concerned with the world and our senses. And so this class is about deepening your aesthetic understanding and experiences through history, theory, and practice. So where did art begin? Well, the impulse for art is all the way back in human history, and it's part of what sets us apart as humans. I mean, in this work, we're looking at Lion Panel from Shavak Cave, and you can see the date is 25,000 to 17,000 BCE. This was one of hundreds of images found that depict mostly animals, but also some human hands. In this case, we're seeing rhinos and more than one, and you can see in the background it kind of looks like we're seeing multiple horns here, which could be a representation of multiple animals, or it could be a representation of the movement of the animal. There's a lot of different theories about what these pieces mean. One is that it could have to do with hunting the animals, but in this case, we're seeing an animal that was not hunted for food. So another theory is that it could be a way to connect with the animal, a way to communicate or try and capture the power of these animals that must have been so mysterious to the people during the time period. They didn't have really a way of understanding them. So this would have helped them maybe grasp a little bit more about the animal, or again, try to communicate with the animal in some way. So it's thought that these are part of some sort of ritual. But the most important fact that I want to talk about right now is that they are images. And images are uniquely human. Animals do not make images, and that's what really sets us apart. Another older piece is Stonehenge. You guys have probably heard about this one, 2000 to 1500 BCE. So what we're looking at are concentric rings of these megalith stones that weigh around 50 tons each. What we're seeing above ground also continues below ground, so you can imagine that this stone actually continues and is buried below it, and that is what allows the stones to stand. Again, there's a lot of different theories as to why this was built. It could have been an ancient calendar because of the way the stones lined up at certain times of the year with the sunshine. It could have been a site for ritual, etc. Another older piece is this piece from China called Stemmed Vessel. So this is an interesting piece because it is a cup, but it's so thin and it's so tall that it really is not practical. It's not something that you would use on an everyday basis. So it really pushes the technology of the day in terms of making this piece, but it also creates an item that is only for the elite in the society. So this would have been for maybe a ceremonial use, but definitely not something that an everyday person would have in their house. So when we're talking about artists, there's different functions of an artist, and I want to go through those real quick. So one function is that artists create a place for some human purpose, and we saw this with Stonehenge, right? So we don't necessarily know the exact purpose of Stonehenge, but it is a place that was created for some purpose. We also see artists create extraordinary versions of everyday objects, and we saw this with the stemmed vessel. They record and commemorate. They give tangible form to the unknown. They give tangible form to feelings and ideas. And they refresh our vision and help us see the world in new ways. So going back to that first function of an artist, this is the Vietnam Veteran Memorial by Maya Lin from 1982, and it's in Washington, D.C. And in this piece, she has created a place for a human purpose. And this particular purpose is to commemorate the fallen soldiers of the Vietnam War. And this was a pretty controversial piece because it's a very unusual war memorial. When you think of a war memorial, you usually think of something that has soldiers and maybe raising a flag or, in the midst of battle. But here all we have is these granite planks that as you walk into the monument, they get larger and larger until they eventually become taller than the viewer. And on the granite, this very highly polished granite, there are the names of the 58,000 soldiers that were killed in the Vietnam War. And so you're looking at these names, but then you also are looking at the reflection of yourself, and it becomes this way of kind of connecting with the viewer and making you realize, wow, each one of these names was a person just like myself. And then you may become overwhelmed, or at least you can get a sense of the sacrifice that all these people made in the war. So here's an image of where you can see the reflection of this little girl who's maybe copying a name, maybe a relative or something, where you can see that she's reflected in that granite. So we talked about the stemmed vessel and how artists create extraordinary versions of everyday objects. This is another object. It's called Blackfeet Parfleche from 1885. And this is a rawhide envelope that was created by nomadic Native Americans. And it was decorated with colorful symbols that refer to the tribe's communal life and forces of nature. So again, this is an object that would have been functional, but it's made in an extraordinary way. I mean, they could have easily just created a rawhide envelope and used that, but instead they chose to decorate it with these symbolic, important symbols. So the third function is that the artist can record and commemorate. And so what we're looking at here is the Tree of Jesse. It's a stained glass from Chartres Cathedral from 1150 to 1170. And Chartres Cathedral, like a lot of Gothic cathedrals, are full of these beautiful handmade stained glass windows. And a lot of them are like this one in the sense that they are recording something for education. In this case, it's depicting the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And you can see the patriarch Jesse at the bottom of the image, and then it goes all the way up through Mary and Jesus up at the top. So it is a way of recording and commemorating the family of Jesus Christ in a Catholic cathedral. Here we have another image from 1605 in which we're seeing the reconciliation between father and son, and a very different culture from the image that we just looked at. And here you can tell a lot about the culture from the from the rugs up above, the tapestries, the way that they're dressed. And you can tell a lot about the art style from the way the figures are represented. So again, it's this recording and commemorating for the next generation and for history, so that we, the viewer, can get a sense of what it was like during the time period. The artists also give tangible form to the unknown. In a lot of cases, we're referring to images that can only be imagined, and sometimes religious imagery. So this is Shiva Naraha from India in the 10th century. And it's giving form to the Hindu god Shiva in his guise as Naraha, the lord of the dance. And in it, we're seeing this figure balancing on one foot, dancing, where we have this ring of flames around him. And again, this is something that is not seen, but is imagined and is giving tangible form to this unknown idea. Artists also give tangible form to feelings and ideas. An artist that's well known for this is Vincent van Gogh. This is his Starry Night from 1889. So what he's representing here is his personal feelings as he gazed upon the night sky over this village. And you can imagine what he was feeling as he looked at the stars, as he looked at the landscape. It's all done in these hues of blues and yellows, a little bit of green. So it creates a calm atmosphere, but then you look at the sky and the way that the brushstrokes create texture and kind of moves through the sky. Even the stars themselves seem to be radiating light. So there's this feeling of movement as well. And this is something that, again, you would not get a sense of what he felt unless he painted it in this way. So again, giving tangible forms to feelings or ideas, things that are going on in the mind of the artist that then come out and have tangible form in the form of a painting or a sculpture, etc. Artists also refresh our vision and help us see the world in new ways. An example of that is this piece by Ernst Haas, Peeling Paint on an Iron Bench from 1981. And it's a photograph. And the photograph is of a very common everyday object, as a bench. And in fact, it's a bench that has a lot of peeling paint, and it's been rained on, and there's leaves stuck to it. But when you see it in this image, it becomes a very beautiful thing. It becomes an object of contemplation, and you, the viewer, can then take time to notice and appreciate the details of, how the paint is chipped away, how the rain has made this reflection, and how the leaves are stuck onto the bench. So it helps us see things in a new way. Art can help us see things in a way that we wouldn't always see them. Another example of that is Edward Weston's Pepper No. 30 from 1930. And again, we have just a photograph of a very everyday object. This is a pepper, but the way that it's lit and the way that it's shown in black and white really helps us focus on the curves, the undulations, the way the light is reflecting off this pepper. And it becomes this beautiful, abstract, almost, design. So when we're talking about artists, they have functions, but they also have common traits. So things in common with each other. Some of these common traits include sensitivity, flexibility, originality, playfulness, productivity, fluency, analytical skill, organizational skill. And when we're looking at this image, we can see these traits reflected. So let's look and see what we have here. It's called Hound by Alan Roth, and it's from 1990. And you can see what it's made up of. It's kind of this crate on wheels. It has a cord here, and then coming off the crate, we have these images of noses. And it's called Hound, and what are hounds known for? Well, they're known for their sense of smell. So the artist has been sensitive to what a hound is known for, what a hound is recognized as and by. They're flexible in their definition of a hound, right? I mean, we do have some of the same traits, like we have 4 wheels here instead of legs. We have a little cord here for the tail. But they're flexible in that definition of what could be a leg, what could be a tail. Originality. So the idea of representing a hound is not new in art, but the way that he's gone about this in the sculpture is very original. It's not been seen before. There's a certain playfulness in artists, and the ability to look at something and kind of be playful with that definition. And again, we can see that here in the way he's defined the hound. Productivity. So in order for an artist to be successful, they have to be productive, and it's something that is self-driven in artists. It's not like they have, somebody they have to answer to. They're answering to themselves, and so they have to be productive. And so just the very fact that we have the sculpture sitting in front of us and that it's been produced shows us that productivity. Fluency, so the ability of an artist to be fluent in their materials. And again, we have a very sophisticated sculpture here with these digital screens and some sort of, this is to hide the cords, I'm assuming, to go into the box, and then you have that plug over here. So there's a fluency in the way that the artist has used the materials. Analytical skill. So in order to create this piece, he had to analyze the different traits of a hound. What could be the feet, what could be the body, what could be the nose. So it was analyzing the different parts of the hound. And then organizational skill. Again, artists a lot of the times are self-driven. They don't have a boss necessarily. Maybe they have deadlines they have to meet, but you have to be organized in order to meet those things. So again, the fact that we have this object in front of us, that it's completed, shows a certain level of organizational skill. Here's another work where we can see those same qualities being represented. So this is called Emotor by Tim Hawkinson. The facial features here are actually controlled by this television, this black and white television that has been set up. And the facial features will change depending on the image of the TV. So again, we have the sensitivity of an artist to kind of think of or to look at the human face and say, well, how can I make this interesting and different? Flexibility in their definition of, what a face could be. Originality, definitely, in the sense that we've seen portraits a lot before, but this is a totally original idea of a portrait. Playfulness, I think we can see that in the way that the facial features make silly faces and kind of be playful. Productivity, again, we have the idea that the artist has produced a sculpture or an image that we have in front of us. Fluency, definitely fluent in their materials and the technology that it took to create this image. Analytical skill, so analyzing what a portrait could be, analyzing the qualities of the TV and how they could work together, and then organizational skill again. I mean, if you look at this, you can tell that the artist had to be organized in order to get all of those chords in the right places. All right, so then the last section of chapter 1 is kind of about looking and responding. So we've talked about the functions of an artist, and now we want to talk about how the viewer interprets art. Okay, so when we're talking about looking at art, we have to remember that seeing is a mode of perception. Okay, and when you look at an artwork, your eye is going to take in different details. It's not necessarily going to take in the whole thing at once. It's going to look and it's going to pick out certain things that the brain will then give meaning to. Another important thing to remember is that art is subjective. So you may look at something, I may look at something, and we may come up with different meanings. And that has to do with our difference in backgrounds, our difference in our life experiences, our education, etc. So this class is somewhat about kind of becoming aware of how you're looking and how you're perceiving the artwork. So a good example of how we perceive or how we can look at different details in an artwork can be seen in this piece called Vanitas by Juan de Valdez Leal from 1660. So Vanitas refers to this type of painting where we're going to see just a jumble of kind of a still life of objects, and each object actually has a symbolic meaning. And the meaning will only appear over time when you put all of these details together. So let's look at this and kind of pick out some of the objects that we're seeing. I'll start at the bottom. So here we can see some flowers. Some are alive and we have one that's wilted. We have a skull here wearing a laurel crown. We have a little baby cherub blowing a bubble. We have some scientific texts, some scientific instruments. We have some coins and some jewelry. We have a candle here, and you'll notice the candle is blown out. We have a crown and a scepter, some more gold. We have another scientific instrument here. In the background, we have this figure who's revealing a painting. And the painting is of the Ascension the Last Judgment in Christianity. So we have Christ kind of sitting up here and judging who's going to go to heaven and who's going to go to hell. So let's put these things together and talk about what they could mean. One thing I didn't mention was these dice down here, and the dice are right next to the money. So it could be referring to a game of chance, gambling. The flowers represent life and death. So we have the live flowers and the dead flower. Of course, we have the skull here that also represents death. The angel, the little cherub here blowing the bubble, that sense of being ephemeral, being, there 1 minute and then gone the next, like a bubble. The medals, the money, the crown all suggest wealth, honor, and power. The books and scientific instruments represent education. And then you have, of course, this really important painting in the background, which is the Last Judgment. And so what I think the artist is trying to say here is that life is fleeting like the bubble, right? Possessions, education, all of that is meaningless in death. So you have to live your life the right way, no matter if you have wealth, if you have education, etc. And of course, this is built around a Christian concept. So this idea of if you live your life correctly, if you're a Christian, you'll go to heaven. If you don't, you'll go to hell. So you can have all the riches and the wealth in the world, but if you're not living a Christian life according to these beliefs, you're going to go to hell. So the Vanitas refers to the fleeting nature of earthly life and happiness. So putting all these clues together and creating a meaning for the work, you can see is important to understanding, the concept behind this painting. Now, without kind of being educated as to, well, what do these represent? You can still kind of come up with a meaning on your own, because you can think, well, okay, yes, I know what a scientific book would mean, but not everybody's going to necessarily have that same idea of, okay, well, what a bubble means, what do coins mean? So you can look at this and get a real clear sense of what the painting means, but unless you have a little bit of background information, for example, what this painting means in the background, you're not necessarily going to come up with the same answer as everyone else. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of art, is that you can always look at it and come up with a meaning, but your meaning may be different from other people's. And the fun thing about art is that you'll both be correct. This is Every Touch by Jim Hodges from 1997. What we're looking at is kind of this panel of flowers and leaves. And really, when you look at this, you kind of have to come up with the meaning on your own, because there's not a whole lot that he gives us. It's not like the Vanitas, where we have these images of different objects that have symbolism. Instead, we look at what we have in front of us and we see, oh, okay, there's flowers, there's leaves. What could this mean? Well, flowers have different meanings. That could be referring to nature. It could be referring to, when we get flowers, so ceremonies, important events in life. It could be referring to the beauty of the flowers. And it's going to, depending on your background, your life experiences, you may come to this and think, oh, those flowers remind me of the flowers I got when I graduated. Or, oh, I just love these flowers. They're so beautiful. They remind me of walking through a flower field. So bringing those life experiences to art is very important. And I want you guys to do that throughout this semester. I want to hear what you think and how your life experiences affect how you interpret art. So that's one of the really fun things about this course, and I hope that I can get to know you through these experiences. And that's it for Chapter 1. Thanks.